This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, May 11th. Welcome to Africa 54. We continue to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. This is today's Africa 54. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on Monday warned of vaccine apartheid if wealthier nations hog vaccines while poorer countries go without. Geicha of Reuters reports.
South Africa's president has warned against wealthy nations hogging COVID-19 shots while millions in poor countries die in the queue waiting for them. That, Cyril Ramaphosa said, would be tantamount to, quote, vaccine apartheid. Sub-Saharan Africa has administered the fewest vaccines relative to its population than any other region. 8 doses per 1,000 people compared to 150 per 1,000 globally, according to the World Health Organization. South Africa and India have been pushing for a waiver on some intellectual property rights for vaccines so they can be manufactured domestically.
Excellency President.
US President Joe Biden backed the proposal last week, though it could take months to reach a deal.
South Africa's nationality.
In a newsletter, Ramaphosa called on South Africans to support the waiver, saying vaccines should be a global public good. It is about affirming our commitment to the advancement of equality and human rights, not just in our own country, but around the world, he wrote. Ramaphosa said South Africa was one of only 5 countries on the African continent able to manufacture vaccines, and that there was a need for new capacity to be built.
That was Geicha of Reuters reporting. The World Health Organization said on Monday that the coronavirus variant first identified in India last year was being classified as a variant of global concern. Some preliminary studies are showing that it spread more easily. The B1617 variant is the 4th variant to be designated as being of global concern and requiring heightened tracking and analysis. The others are those first detected in Britain, South Africa, and Brazil. The variant has already spread to other countries, and many nations have moved to cut or restrict movements from India. Sudan is facing an acute shortage of medical oxygen as a third wave of coronavirus infection swells in the economically struggling country. David Doyle of Reuters has more.
In Sudan's capital, Khartoum, oxygen cylinders are being loaded into the back of a car. They are on their way to a coronavirus patient's home for private use. But most of those seriously ill with COVID-19 are facing an acute shortage of medical oxygen. That's partly due to power cuts that impeded production at the economically struggling country's main plant. Hussein Malassi, a senior manager at the Sudanese liquid gas company, says a lack of cylinders is another problem.
Before the severity of this pandemic, the distribution of cylinders over the hospitals was sufficient. What happened is that the consumption of oxygen increased several times with the pandemic, and the cylinders at hospitals did not increase with the same level.
A government survey found that 38% of oxygen cylinders have been smuggled out of the health system for private use. Some patients bribed hospital staff, others relied on personal relationships. Everyone else has been left in hospitals unable to provide adequate care during a third wave of infections. Montasir Othman, Director of Emergency and Epidemic Control at Sudan's Ministry of Health, said times of peak infections make clear the weak capacity of Sudan's hospitals. He added that the government is working to make more cylinders available. But it's not just oxygen. The country, which has recorded 33,000 cases and 2,600 deaths since the start of the pandemic, has just 300 ventilators. Out of 37 hospitals that can take COVID-19 patients, only 11 are in the capital, which has 70% of cases. Last month, officials said Sudan could meet just 40% of its need for medicines. Social media is awash with desperate pleas for help as relatives seek oxygen cylinders, beds and drugs for their loved ones.
That report by David Doyle of Reuters. Last week, a young mother from Mali attracted worldwide attention as she gave birth to nanoplets. 25-year-old Halima Cissé, who was expecting 7 children, gave birth to 9 babies against all expectations. According to reports, the mother did not use fertility treatments, which can cause multiple birth pregnancies. For more on the subject, Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu spoke with Dr. Edward Sang, a gynecologic oncologist at Kenyatta National Hospital in Nairobi, Kenya.
Most of the time when we have multiple births, especially more than 2, most of the time it's due to fertility treatment because it causes a lady to ovulate more than usual, and then we get the multiple births. So I was quite surprised to hear that this was not the case in this situation. Usually multiple births occur in 2 ways. A lady ovulating more than 1 egg in a cycle, and both of them conceiving. And so we would have like 2 different individuals. Then there is a situation where there's 1 pregnancy forming, then after conceiving, then that embryo breaks into 2 or more than 2. And then now you have identical twins because they have the same genetic material. It's increasing with time because of the increased seeking of fertility treatment and the increased use of medications that make women ovulate more. We're also getting more ladies going in for in vitro fertilization, and that with the placement of more than 1 embryo, then we do get more and more births coming up. Some medications can do that, even without IVF. First of all, it's not many centers or hospitals that can manage this. It has to be a hospital with a pediatric or neonatal ICU for a very tiny baby. There are very few of those in Africa. There are other complications that can occur with multiple births, like high blood pressure, like excessive bleeding. Those are things that would come up and may make the pregnancy even more difficult. Prematurity is a problem. There are so many complications that we should be aware of. It's not as easy as it looks. Twins are easier to deal with, but triplets, quadruplets, the lady may not be able to work, probably have more rest, closer monitoring, more visits to the doctor, and most likely delivery by cesarean section. She has to, especially in Africa, plan accordingly so that when the time comes, she's able to have a cesarean section. And not only that, the babies have to have a good chance. The staff and the facilities for premature babies should be nearby.
That was Dr. Edward Sang, a gynecologic oncologist at Kenyatta National Hospital, speaking with Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. In much of Africa, including Zimbabwe, women struggling to have children often face stigma and ridicule. To help overcome the problem, 2 Zimbabwean doctors in 2017 reopened the country's only in vitro fertilization clinic. Columbus Mavunga has more from Harare.
Since the clinic reopened in 2017, several years after its previous owner retired, IVF Zimbabwe says it has helped about 120 women have babies through in vitro fertilization. Doctors Tinovimba Mhlanga and Sidin Farai say some couples struggle to have children because of lack of knowledge and funds, but they are happy to help them reach their goals.
Assisting couples to conceive is helping maintaining marriages to continue, the unions to continue, and also bringing livelihood to people's lives.
One 30-year-old client is expecting to deliver next month after getting help from IVF Zimbabwe in her second marriage. The first one collapsed after 7 years of failing to conceive. She does not want to be identified.
Or the blame would always come back to us women. Maybe there's something that you did, or maybe there's you didn't go well. To be honest, there was a lot of negativity coming from the backstab.
The United Nations World Health Organization says failure to conceive in Africa is largely blamed on women, although half the infertility cases are caused by challenges men face. The UN body says infertility problems are common and can be overcome, but in Africa, many governments are often more focused on health problems like epidemics, infectious diseases, and malnutrition.
And therefore, infertility will tend to fall right low on the priority list. Fertility treatment is also very expensive, to the extent that even insurance companies are reluctant to fund fertility management.
Patients at IVF Zimbabwe say they pay around $4,000 for treatment, a huge sum for the average person in Zimbabwe. But to clients ready to welcome their first child after a long wait, the investment is worth it. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
A female peacekeeper from Malawi was killed in an attack by an Islamist militia in eastern Congo's North Kivu province on Monday morning, according to the United Nations and the Malawian government. Shitenji Kamanga, aged 28, was killed when the UN base in the village of Kilia was attacked at 1:30 p.m. local time, according to a statement by the Malawi Defense Force. Separately, a local civil rights group said that fighters with the Allied Democratic Forces, an Islamist armed group with Ugandan origins, attacked the villages of Kilia, around 18 kilometers southeast of Beni, killing at least 5 people. It was not clear if the figure included the peacekeeper. As graduation approaches for university and college students in the United States, students are preparing for one of the most important milestones of their lives. But COVID-19 has taken the pomp out of this year's celebrations. Yanet Janet explains. Kathleen Struck narrates.
Just a few notes of this march, and one universal image comes to mind. Graduation is a huge achievement for college students in the United States, especially international students who live far from home to further their goals. Ceremonies mark years of hard work, and celebrations are usually festive and fun. But not this year.
I don't care too much about the actual ceremony itself. At this point, it's just like, okay, that's going to be like a check on the lists of things to look out for, things to expect in May. And I mean, part of me is already kind of like moved on.
Because the COVID-19 pandemic has locked down campuses and made travel impossible for many families, most commencement ceremonies have gone virtual.
Thanks to everyone who's been part of the journey, especialmente mis padres que dejaron todo.
But many families and students are apart.
I mean, they've been super excited about this since pretty much the day I got into Columbia. So I can see why it's so heartbreaking for them not to attend. But obviously, you know, like the safest thing to do is to not fly over and just like take the risk of getting COVID.
Some universities are holding graduation ceremonies in person with safety modifications like requiring masks or physical distancing. But it still won't be the same. Students are allowed to invite only a limited number of family and friends.
I do have a big family, so I'm hoping at least 10, but I know due to COVID, they're probably going to limit us, and they're probably not going to have that much people per person.
With limited attendance, families who can gather will celebrate off campus.
To celebrate my graduation, we will be having a family get-together, and we're just going to cook.
Well, my housemates and I will probably get together and bake a cake, drink some champagne or whatever, just do like a very small group gathering. And then since my family is in Vietnam, I'll probably just call them or something. This has been the only thing that they've been looking forward to.
Virtual or not, students are finishing up final exams and soaking up the days they have left with friends they've made at school.
It's kind of hard for me to kind of process that in a few weeks. We'll all be in different parts of the world doing amazing things.
I think this year is just all about finishing, going hard, and, in the end, putting your effort into, the outcomes. There's a lot of, it's just everybody's helping each other trying to get through it. So in the end, we know that we can do it. We've done it.
For Janet Chernett, Kathleen Struck, VOA News.
Coming up, as violence against Asians in the U.S. rise, some turn to self-defense classes. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Student journalists across 23 campuses of California State University have played a crucial role in keeping other students informed during the COVID pandemic. The student newsrooms are now linked through an online newswire, pooling resources and sharing information across the expansive state. Mike O'Sullivan reports.
With 485,000 students, this is the largest public university system in the United States. Since the start of the COVID pandemic and remote classes, students have been eager for news, especially news that affects California State University or the CSU system. Student journalists provide it.
Whether that's board of trustees, whether that's campus presidents, whether that's student organizations, it's difficult for them to really see what's happening across the CSU. Because yes, they can go online to each of the individual CSU student papers and try to find stories there.
But there was no single source, so while in his final year at California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, Aidan McGloin decided to share campus news, and with other Cal State students, created the Student Newswire. Student journalists meet in a chat room on the internet platform Slack and share stories through the self-publishing site Substack. The Student Newswire covered recent protests by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders after a series of racially based attacks.
Not everybody is in, these major cities that are having these large protests. And with San Francisco, there's always something going on.
Students at Cal State Dominguez Hills and suburban Los Angeles cover events on and off campus.
So a lot of our big, hard-hitting news stories have been in regards to racial reconciliation, updates on COVID protocols, construction happening on campus, and how the campus is helping students with the virtual and distance learning environment.
And when stories are of wider interest, they're shared. One recent graduate who still helps out with her student newspaper says newsrooms need diverse perspectives, but
don't hire me just because Black Lives Matter is happening in the summer and you don't have a Black journalist to cover it. Hire me, maybe you do want that Black perspective, but also respect that I also want to talk about things that aren't about trauma or police brutality or something like that.
Student reporters offer coverage not found elsewhere, says a faculty advisor.
You're not going to see this in the LA Times. You're not going to see this in the San Diego Union Tribune. You're not going to see this in the Bakersfield Californian. We have original content that can't be duplicated anyplace else.
Student journalists point out the reporting process is the same on college campuses.
Student journalists are kind of looked down on or not considered as legitimate, but we're out here telling the stories, a lot of the same stories. But what makes us really special and what sets us apart is that we are dedicated to telling the stories of campus.
And sharing them, providing news in a time of isolation. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
A community of Asian Americans and their allies in Los Angeles are offering free self-defense classes. Volunteer trainers hope to equip people with skills that could save them from the rising violence against Asians in the U.S. Supakit Pataratiaranan reports.
So much right here. You're grabbing them.
Akemi Luke is one of the students interested in free self-defense classes taught by professional instructors who volunteer at the Pan Pacific Park in Los Angeles.
Do you try to pull them down with those hands? Because I already feel her pulling me a little hard.
She hopes the techniques will be helpful when it's necessary, as many Asians have been targets of violence.
So if we get attacked, we have to know how to fight back. We have to know the techniques, and we have to know how to protect ourselves.
Geicha Colton is a single mother who has survived a sexual assault. Like Luke, Colton hopes that learning self-defense is a preemptive step.
I don't want to have to ever be in that position where I have to learn how to protect my own life if I'm being attacked. But obviously, because of the world we live in, it's unfortunately a reality for all people, especially now for Asian, especially for women. Women are always, we're always going to be vulnerable for attacks.
Even with my arms, I can still do this. I can grab and squeeze.
Sabrina Johnson and Alexandra Bernal volunteered to teach the self-defense class. Although they are not of Asian descent, they feel that it's important to use their expertise in helping other people combat violence against Asians.
And I think as an ally, if you're not Asian yourself, but you see someone being attacked, that's Asian or of any race, if you know self-defense, you could intervene. You could have the confidence to tell that person harassing them, like, hey, stop bothering that person.
Trainers say they will continue to offer classes like this for the Asian American community, hoping they will empower people to combat a rise in discriminatory attacks. For Supakit Pataratiranun in Los Angeles, Noprat Chai Chalerm Mongkol, VOA News.
The recent guilty verdict in the trial of the officer who killed George Floyd came after months of street demonstrations and calls for greater police accountability. However, police reform faces an uphill climb in Congress. Some worry it won't go nearly far enough. Arasha Arbasadi has our report.
Before the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin began, the House of Representatives passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It is now up to the Senate to act.
We should not mistake a guilty verdict in this case as evidence that the persistent problem of police misconduct has been solved, or that the divide between law enforcement and so many of the communities they serve has been bridged. It has not.
Schumer and other Democratic lawmakers call for policy changes in policing, such as repealing qualified immunity and creating a database of police officers and the complaints against them. Not going quite as far, Republican Senator Rick Scott, a vocal supporter of law enforcement, called for greater accountability on ABC's This Week.
I think you start with more transparency, and I think you do what I've done and what I did as governor. You sit down with law enforcement and say, okay, so what can we do to be better, and why are some officers better, some departments better than others, rather than saying, oh, everybody is doing the wrong thing, and creating an incentive for people not to do their job.
Greg Carr is chair of Afro-American Studies at Howard University in Washington. He calls for a total overhaul of policing in the United States.
We see, for example, what happened during the Floyd trial. As another Minneapolis area person was killed by a police officer, that officer resigned from the force. Now the question becomes, if they want to, do they show up in an adjacent police district with a new job? And so part of this national database will at least take away from local police departments the excuse, oh, we didn't know, or we didn't check. No, and so I think it's incremental. This need to remake policing. We're not talking about reform. We're talking about remaking policing.
Police unions have resisted a national database and other reform efforts in support of their members. Detroit Police Chief James Craig says law enforcement needs community backing and that morale is already low.
When you talk about defunding and you're not speaking up on behalf of the good men and women who are out doing the job the correct way, and nobody in a seat of influence is standing up in a courageous way and denouncing the rhetoric, then they don't feel supported. And so people are leaving. So good luck at trying to rehire or hiring a new group of officers to fill the void.
For now, however, the reform legislation is stalled in the evenly split Senate because of Republican opposition, and Chauvin, who is being held in a maximum security prison near Minneapolis, will be sentenced in June. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
The ornate National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. has reopened its doors after more than a year. Maxim Moskalkov reports the museum launched 2 new exhibitions to mark the occasion.
After being closed for 16 months due to renovations and the COVID-19 pandemic, the National Building Museum has reopened with a new look and some new exhibitions.
We have been open for 1 weekend only so far. We are limiting our hours and our days. We're only open Friday, Saturday, Sunday from 11 to 4, and it was crowded in here this weekend.
To celebrate its opening, the museum has launched 2 new exhibitions. One of them is dedicated to Mass Design Group, an organization that creates projects to help fight diseases like TB, cholera, and Ebola.
They found that by sort of creating as much outdoor space as possible in their design of these healthcare centers, they really help reduce the risk of disease transmission. Also, it's part of their design is allowing lots of good airflow and lots of ventilation and opportunities for sunlight and views and accessibility to nature.
The second exhibition is a memorial project honoring victims of gun violence in the U.S. It also was created by Mass Design in collaboration with artist Hank Willis Thomas and the Everytown for Gun Safety Fund, the largest nonprofit campaigning against gun violence in America.
58% of the American population has been directly impacted, or someone they love has been impacted by gun violence, so it's a lot of people. And we, for years, had been interested in the concept of a memorial because it is, obviously, it's a way to commemorate these lives that have been taken.
The memorial consists of 4 houses, each made of 700 glass blocks to honor the lives of those who died from gun violence.
The glass house, which is, the United States, where we are often pointing fingers and maybe throwing rocks at the problems of other countries, but not really aware of the vulnerability of our own society.
In 2020, gun violence killed nearly 20,000 Americans, according to data from Gun Violence Archive. An additional 24,000 people died by suicide with a gun. The exhibition will be open until September 25, 2022, and is free for visitors. Maxim Moskalkov for VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, thanks for watching.